My name is Jean-Jacques Rupert, and I'm from Luxembourg. I'm a psychologist by training, having studied psychology and educational sciences in the UK, France, and up to a point Germany too. Contrary to most psychologists in Luxembourg, I do not have a background in natural sciences, but in English, French, and German literature, Latin, and philosophy. I've worked in France and in Germany, as well as in the UK. After having been employed as a research assistant in the School of Psychology at the University of St. Andrews, I returned to Luxembourg, where I have been working part-time since '94 as an educational psychologist and guidance counselor for the Ministry of Education, Childhood and Youth. Since 2005, I've had the privilege of being the head of the Applied Vocational Psychology and Policy Research Unit, better known by the acronym AFOP, a small multinational Luxembourg-based research unit. This research unit allows me to do things and say things I would not be allowed to say and do as a civil servant. I'm also teaching 2 modules in the master program in counseling sciences at the University of Applied Labor Studies in Mannheim in Germany, one on counseling theories and approaches, and the second one on vocational and life biographies, as well as working closely on a number of research projects with the university. Furthermore, I've been collaborating for a number of years with Istanbul Technical University. The talk I'm going to give you originates in a demand by the University of Applied Labor Studies in Mannheim for our yearly International Day, promoting mobility for counselors, that means practitioners working in employment agencies, as well as the students in counseling sciences. And I think that's very important, and it's a work that is permanently in progress. I adapt it regularly and change it regularly. Okay, I better start clicking here. Okay. That's the side of the ministry. That's research unit. That's Mannheim. They've got a second campus in Schwerin in what used to be Eastern Germany. And then, as much as I do enjoy doing research and working in higher education, I would, however, not like to miss out on the practical side of the counseling business. And I love having a go at lost causes, as you can see here. Firstly, I would like to there's something else I'm going to say straight away because I had to change between presentations here. Before I will speak about mobility, please allow me a couple of personal comments. I was very mobile on Thursday morning because I moved from a starting point A, my home, to a point of arrival, the university here. Etymologically, I am therefore a migrant. I have, however, done so voluntarily, in great comfort, in the understanding that I would be well received at my place of arrival, and above all, in the knowledge that in case of an emergency, I would be able to rely on the protection conferred onto me by my citizenship. I am therefore in stark contrast to all those fellow humans who for some time now have almost shamelessly, euphemistically been labeled as migrants. In this context, migrant is an awful word, a non-word, and all those people who never tire of talking about migrants only instead of refugees simply forget that it is not their personal merit to have been born at the right time in the right place. Obviously, people who flee war and misery are technically migrants. But above all, they are refugees, and that at the very latest once they reach our shores. Before, during, and after the world wars, there were huge refugee movements in Europe, and all the people who were fleeing at that time, as well as all of those who are fleeing now, had and have one thing in common. They could and can, respectively, no longer rely on the protection of a nation state. The German philosopher and political theorist Hannah Arendt, who had to flee Nazi Germany, wrote in 1951, in part probably based on her own personal experience, that an individual who no longer can count on the protection of a nation state no longer has any right to rights. And this is precisely the situation today's refugees find themselves in. Yes, there is the Geneva Convention that is supposed to protect refugees. But then again, this convention is at best referred to by pompous politicians in flowery speeches when they want to show off their humanistic credentials. The real challenge we are facing is how to give back to these people without any rights the right to their rights, that is, their human rights. The question of the rights of refugees is therefore less a theoretical than a practical issue. And here I refer once more to Hannah Arendt. One should and one will judge us by our actions only, and not by our noble feelings, good intentions, and nice words. And in that sense, I unambiguously welcome the refugee policy of a number of European countries, including my own. Please now have a look at the following slides. I thank you in advance for your understanding regarding these brief preliminary remarks to the following light-hearted talk about mobility. And now for something completely different. De damen en de heren, lieve collega's en collega's. Så er Simons merci for invitationen, die mir erlaubt hat, heute hier in der Dirsch zu sein und mich lohnisch riechen zu dürfen. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, many thanks for your invitation, which allows me to be with you here today and to say a few words to you. These few words in Luxembourgish represent what is very important, a very important part of my identity, namely a language that is my own. Although Luxembourg is officially trilingual, only one of our languages, Luxembourgish, is practically spoken by Luxembourgers only. That is about half of our population. Thus, Luxembourgish today, as in the past, is the secret language of the natives. Our other two official languages are French and German, which serve as working and administration languages. And it is this multilingualism, as well as our ability to mediate between the Germanic and the Latin cultures, which helps to explain whatever influence Luxembourg enjoys today beyond our borders. In contrast, were we only to speak Luxembourgish, Luxembourg would find itself in deep isolation, while including French only would still banish the Grand Duchy from the heart of Europe to the periphery of the Francophonie. However, the addition of German forms a genuine bridge to Eastern Europe, where the language of Goethe is, after English, the second foreign language. Clearly, a small country like Luxembourg needs multilingualism to survive and to prevent it from sinking into obscure provincialism. However, the ability to communicate efficiently in 2 or more languages also represents a tremendous asset that is unfortunately often undervalued in so-called big European countries such as Germany, the UK, and France. I cannot help quoting the former Belgian Foreign Minister, Paul-Henri Spaak, who said more than half a century ago, "There are only small states in Europe. Some just do not know it yet." I might add that 50 years later, quite a few still do not know it, or more likely, they do not want to know it. Luxembourg is a Grand Duchy. It's the only Grand Duchy in the world with the Grand Duke as head of state. And although I'm not a fervent monarchist, this is the official portrait of the Grand Duke at my home. Whenever I take a peek at politicians in other countries, I'm quite embarrassed to admit that we are not doing so badly, after all, with our Grand Duke Henri. So I come from this small country of a little more than 600,000 people that is regularly accused, not least by contemporaries, who should and most likely do know better, to be responsible for all the evils in the world. Not all that long ago, there was a German politician who dreamt of becoming chancellor and who likened Luxembourg to Ouagadougou, the capital of the West African country of Burkina Faso. This was topped by a comment in April 2014 by a certain Laurent Wauquiez, one of those politicians all too characteristic of the political elite of the self-proclaimed Grande Nation. Monsieur Wauquiez claimed Luxembourg was superficial and very artificial. He would love to throw us out of the European Union. Perhaps, I suppose, because in contrast to France, Luxembourg respects the ominous Maastricht criteria. Monsieur Wauquiez seems to have forgotten or prefers to ignore that it was none other than France that insisted on those infamous criteria. I respectfully remind this gentleman that over 40,000 of his compatriots have fled France and established their permanent residence in the Grand Duchy. In addition, this supposedly artificial country provides close to 200,000 daily commuters, including more than 100,000 French nationals with real jobs and real wages, which is not too bad after all for a country which is alleged to have no economic or industrial fabric. However, I do not want to hide from you the fact that Luxembourg, like many other countries in Europe, is facing a series of daunting challenges, not least the challenge of how to better integrate into our society the 47% of foreigners from 171 nations who live permanently in Luxembourg, particularly as regards educating and training children of foreign origin. The title of my presentation today is, however, very orthodox, even if to be mobile or not to be echoes Shakespeare. As you can easily see in this picture, it very much looks as if this amateur Hamlet will be very mobile pretty soon. As I have told you, I come from Luxembourg, a country so small that if Superman were a Luxembourger, he would only be allowed to fly vertically for fear of otherwise leaving the national airspace. Here, incidentally, is a picture of our very own national superhero, Superjump. And as you can see, his aerodynamic qualities are almost as good as mine. Luxembourgers display some almost psychopathological traits. On the one hand, we're doing so well that we could almost change our national motto, "We willen blijven wat we zijn," we want to remain what we are, to "We willen halen wat we hun," we want to keep what we've got. And this without first thinking about who we actually are. But then again, I do not think that Luxembourg is all that different from most places when it comes to people wanting to hang on to whatever they've got. This, let me call it, why search low and high what you see when what you seek lies nearby mentality is age-related. Because in their formative years, Luxembourgers are actually exceptionally mobile. The Lilliput size of my home country may be one explanation why mobility is for many Luxembourgers almost second nature. Logically, the smaller one's own country, the larger and closer are the countries that lie beyond its borders. However, another reason may be found in an almost innate curiosity that leads many of my compatriots to go where they should probably not go, a bit like in the introduction to the Star Trek series, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before. Here, incidentally, a nice little illustration of one of my inquisitive ancestors defying death by approaching one of the greatest dangers known to man. I translate it, or no, I won't translate it. You've got these two cavemen standing there, and one says, there are things in this world that are not meant to be understood, mysteries that are best left unexplained. And then you've got my ancestor saying, that said, however, let's go and see whether she's got any roommates. A vast majority of students leave their admittedly small nest to study at universities and colleges abroad. You will find young people from Luxembourg in most countries of the world. I was very lucky to have studied in several. And when, after having completed their studies, these students return home to Luxembourg, they do not necessarily have a partner in tow, as I did by importing my future better half from Scotland. But they most certainly bring back a vast range of knowledge and know-how which they have acquired abroad. Furthermore, they have also been immersed in the culture of the country in which they studied. Thus, a Luxembourg student in the UK has learned not to be too impressed if an Englishman says, "Oh, how interesting," because it's most likely that he actually means, this is complete nonsense. The importance of culture is in fact so overwhelming that should I ever have a heart attack and survive, I will definitely not go and see a doctor who studied, let's say, in Germany. For there's a strong possibility that they would advise me to take it easy, to take care of myself, and most importantly, not to overdo things, as if things suddenly represented an immense risk. No, I will try and see a doctor who studied in Italy, for example, because it's much more likely that he would encourage me to carpe diem, to seize the day, and quite simply to enjoy life as best as I can. Here the doctor says, my advice to you is to eat, drink, and be merry. And by the way, there exists no statistically significant difference in life expectancy between German and Italian heart attack patients. Although in counseling, we are usually not dealing with matters of life and death, we cannot, in our multicultural societies, afford to ignore the impact of culture on both the counselor and the counselee. There's another, initially unexpected side effect that occurs when you are mobile, regardless of the size of your country of origin. Once you've made yourself comfortable abroad, once the initial exotic strangeness of your destination has faded a bit, there comes a time when you realize that contrary to your assumption, the grass is actually not greener on the other side, and that the others also put on their trousers, one leg at a time. And so, a mobility experience can actually give you increased confidence in yourself and confirm the validity of your own knowledge and skills. Of much greater significance, however, is the fact that you learn that many roads lead to Rome, or as the English put it so cruelly, there is more than one way to skin a cat. A mobility experience should also prevent a way of thinking which our French friends never tire to condemn, while at the same time forever advocating. That is the so-called pensée unique, the one right way of thinking. Indeed, if ever you are near Luxembourg, close by the French-German border, you can visit the physical manifestation of this mainstream conformist way of thinking, which does not allow for alternative. The ligne Maginot, the Maginot Line, was built to prevent German troops from invading France again after World War I. Unfortunately for them, it never crossed the minds of the strategic eggheads at army headquarters in Paris that the Germans would take a quick look at this fortification and then decide to simply walk around it, because all the guns were pointing towards Germany and couldn't turn around. When the Germans approaching from behind did precisely that, their action was incomprehensible to the French military, to whom so-called lateral thinking was totally alien. As I am reasonably messy, I love the anarchy of ideas put forth by this anonymous graffiti artist I stumbled across by chance some years ago in Padua in Italy. And it says, against the pensée unique, I mean the one way of thinking, for the contraband of ideas. In the first place, a mobility experience should be a journey of discovery for all involved, both visitors and hosts. Each can learn from the other, and occasionally, lifelong friendships begin from such encounters. Let me conclude by returning to an issue that is often perceived as, well, let's say tricky in the context of mobility: missing or inadequate knowledge of a foreign language. As soon as I venture beyond the borders of my country, Luxembourgish is completely meaningless. Of course, I could now proudly proclaim my otherness. I could even refer to the weird concept of exception française, the French exception, and seek refuge in a Luxembourgish exception. Or I could retreat to what the British once proudly referred to as splendid isolation, a condition they're likely to find themselves in pretty soon again. However, in the end, such an attitude would surely not serve me very well. To illustrate the importance of knowing foreign languages in an academic environment, let me refer you to one of the most important academic works of all time. When Isaac Newton published his Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy in 1687, it was written in Latin, the lingua franca of his time. Had this Englishman written his groundbreaking book in English, it would have been ignored. In today's world, however, Brexit or non-Brexit, the lingua franca is not Latin, but English. And therefore, I can only encourage you to learn English. Please do not get me wrong. I'm not being a language policeman. I do not consider any language less valuable or worthy than another. Indeed, I know very well from my own experience that in many places where English is not the native language, countless fantastic things are going on. But, like it or not, it is a fact that many new ideas and innovative practices in vocational counseling that deserve to be better known only would be if the relevant publications were in English. Let me therefore leave you with two recommendations. Firstly, be mobile, and secondly, learn English. On the first point, one more remark. We all know that not each and every experience in life is positive, but please do not give up. Should your first mobility experience not live up to your hopes and expectations, please be persistent and stay focused, because as with most things in life, so with mobility, practice makes perfect. And here you've got Eve saying to Adam, well, that was original. However, finally, I've still got a confession to make. In my younger years, I was fascinated by the supposedly clever sayings in Mao Zedong's Little Red Book. However, for some time now, another also red book has gained greater importance in my life. In fact, rather more importance than is probably good for me, or rather for my waistline. The Michelin Guide. In this Bible for gourmets, the best restaurants are each year rewarded with 3 stars and described as follows. One of the best kitchens, worth the trip. Well, I hope that all your mobility experience will be the best and worth the trip. So I wish you bon voyage and thank you for your attention.
Tak já bych rád pozval teď panelisty a už si tak trošku připravujte otázky do diskuze. So I would like to invite you to this table, to the panel. I have one more chair. So one microphone will be for you. Here. You can share it if I can. It's for you. One.
Yes.
Yes, you have these headphones. Okay.
No,
it's okay. Okay. Tak teď zkusíme zazápasit s českým a anglickým jazykem, zaimprovizovat. So we try to speak English, Czech, we will see. Also for interpreters it will be hard maybe, but okay. The aim of our discussion will be to think about the topic to be mobile or not to be, or to be in network or not to be. How important or not only how important, but what it means, mobility for careers, for career guidance and networking. So it's the main topic of the conference. Je to vlastně hlavní téma konference a tak o něm teď chvilku zkusíme podebatovat. And first reflective circle will be among you. So I will ask you for some first reflection now after presentation around the question to be mobile or not to be. A pak bude druhý cyklus a to zapojíme vás. Takže se připravte, že budete také diskutovat v tom širším reflektivním kruhu, jak to Osa hezky nazvala. Osa have nice call for this tool. The name is reflective circle, yes? Reflective circle, yes. Okay, so if here is some volunteer to start to, if you have some ideas around this mobilities, and because you had also some presentations yesterday, or the next presentation of Mika will be also a little bit about mobility. So maybe you have some first reflection now, and who would like to start, it's up to you. Yes.
Okay, so thank you for the presentation. I think mobility is a really interesting and important topic. Obviously, my presentation also concerned mobility. I think there are two... I should say that in my experience, I have benefited a lot from European engagement and from conferences like this and from learning from different people and from different countries about how careers guidance works in different places. I have two thoughts. One thought is about how, if mobility is helpful, which I think it often is, how do we support people who are less mobile? I'm aware personally that I find it difficult to get to European conferences just because of the cost of travel for me. So I'm interested in whether or not social networks, online tools give us an ability to connect with each other, which don't require physical mobility. The other question I have, and it draws on what I was speaking about yesterday, is I think there is a risk in the narrative of mobility being good and necessary, and I think the risk is that not everybody is equally mobile, and so we risk reinforcing the privilege that people have who are mobile, and we risk reinforcing inequality. So that's a question I have about how we handle that. I think those are my main thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for your first reflection. Thank you.
Briefly, I want to mention my life story. I studied in Prague, Charles University, psychology. I worked for 2 years in Prague, then I moved for 10 years to live in Bulgaria, in Sofia, where I worked as a psychologist. So also it wasn't absolutely easy because you should understand not only and know the language, but also understand, cultural aspects. And after I have worked there in area of work and organization psychology, and also clinical and health psychology. And then I moved back to Czech Republic, where I continue at work of a psychologist in the area of transport psychology. And later I moved to academic area. And what I wanted to say that from my point of view, mobility is very good and reasonable way how we can get insight in various topics, not only in context of other countries, but we can understand much more ourselves. We can, it's a reflective part of our life. When I remember my past experiences, it was a little bit more difficult because it was in time of socialistic era. So we haven't got internet, we haven't got smartphones, Skype or something like that. So also adaptation or, to live abroad, I also perceive homesick and, it wasn't absolutely easy. But I can say that also as an example of mobility pros and problematic aspects, because I'm in touch with my friends in Bulgaria, and I can say that, for example, from Bulgaria and also from my friends from Hungary, I know that a large proportion of young generation and educated generation move to West countries. I understand it because due to different socioeconomic standards, but it's from point of view of mobility is a brain drain. So, you know, I understand that from individual point of view, it's very important, and I can support and facilitate, you know, student exchange programs. But from the group mobility or regional mobility, sometimes it's devastating, the situation in not only in various regions but also in countries.
Thank you. Osa, if you can.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, hello. I am Mika Launikari from Finland. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And thank you, Jean-Jacques, for your very rich presentation. Really mind-blowing. All the perspectives that you shared there. If we look carefully at the European Union documents on mobility and migration, then mobility is to be used for intra-EU movement of people. And migration is for those who come from third countries, being outside of Europe. So this is something the European Commission aims at, how would I say, that they have decided that this is the way to categorize and define things. We may agree or we may not agree. That's not the issue here. But then also what sometimes annoys me a lot when we discuss intra-EU mobility is that there has been free movement or movement of people throughout human history. So this is not a new phenomenon. And this is sometimes really stupid that we think that, okay, this is a global world and people move around. They do, but they have always done that. And this is like reinventing the wheel somehow. Of course, these days, thanks to the initiatives of the European Union and member states happily joining in and supporting those initiatives, it is possible for people en masse in great volumes to be mobile. So this is, of course, a very good thing. And we should also remember that there is a heavy machinery behind all this. And we should also look at the values and goals that the European Union has initially set for itself. That there is this agenda of making us all feel European, be European, etc. So we are living in a bubble, sort of. And therefore, when people then come from outside of the European Union and want to get a foothold here, then all of a sudden we feel that they are threatening us or they are somehow creating a problem for us. And of course, the living standard across Europe varies a lot from country to country. Luxembourg probably being on the top, and then we know that there are other countries doing less well in terms of economy or political stability. But altogether, we in the European Union are doing relatively well in comparison to those poor people who come from war or conflict areas like Syria or Somalia, Afghanistan, etc., you name it. So I think we have quite some responsibility for those people who risk their lives to come to our union. So we talk about borderless Europe, but it only applies to us Europeans. Those coming from outside, they are not really accepted, or they need to fulfill certain criteria. It must then be work-based mobility or something like that, work-based migration, when they are allowed to enter. And I also believe that we who work in the area of guidance and counseling, that we really are interested in the humans, the human beings, in their well-being, and we should really at least try to receive people with open arms. It's our responsibility. Okay, I stop here before I start sounding pathetic.
Thank you.
No, you could go on. Thank you. I'm very glad that you reflected before me, because you sort of framed it now also and separated mobility and migration in a way that made it clearer, I think. Because I was a little bit, thank you, Jean-Jacques, also for your presentation, because I was also a little bit, to start with, I was a little bit provoked when this John Cleese, and now going to something else, that it become clear just from your presentation and from what you said now, you have to discuss this in different ways. There are different issues, actually, migration and mobility. And when you mix it, it can be very arrogant due to the migration situation. It can be, I know it's not the intention, but it can be sort of, because I think that the migration, we can leave it, we can look at it, and then we can leave it also. But if you're a migrant, you cannot. You cannot leave and go on talking about mobility. So that's really, so that is, my reflection, I'm not that much into mobility issues, but I think sometimes, and like you said also, sometimes it can be a romantic view on mobility also, and what it's good for. And when I was thinking here to myself, it's sometimes it's like a post-colonial colonization that we are still continuing with this mobility, because who is comfortable abroad? Who is comfortable when you enter new societies and that is of course reflecting the power relations that we are all the time are negotiating and experience, and that we experience in our bodies if we feel that we have the right to be mobile or not, and how you are met when you are mobile also with your passport, the difference in different passports, and how you how you are met in different parts of the world being mobile also. So this colonial relations between countries and between Europe and the other parts of the world are still here, and we sort of have them in our bodies all the time. And to me it was like, and I think also in career counseling sessions, these hierarchies between countries and between individuals are always sort of present in career counseling sessions also. And if we are not aware about that, we will how do you say, reproduce them. Was this very confusing? Maybe I went to some being pathetic, as you said.
Right, I would like to say a few more things. I mean, obviously, I'm not the mobility pope. But I can tell you a couple of things. I mean, in Luxembourg, it is a must. It is above all a must if you're halfway bright. I'm the kind of person who thinks you don't need to be particularly intelligent to go to university. What it takes is a bit of personality. And I'll be very honest. I mean, if my daughter had said, I want to go to Luxembourg University, I would have said, well, good luck. I actually said, you're going to go abroad. And obviously she wanted to. We train at Luxembourg University, above all, elementary school teachers. And I am sorry to say that they usually are very conservative, because they never flew the nest. If Luxembourg, being small, it would produce some kind of intellectual incest. And that's why I think mobility is very important. What Mika said, I mean, I can only repeat what Jean-Claude Juncker said not so long ago, that Europe is still the best place to live currently. I think we forget, however, one thing. In 1900, basically, the Europeans constituted 20% of the world population. Beginning of this millennium, I think we were 11. By 2050, 7. And by 2100, if the world still exists, we're going to be 4%. So our importance in the world, on the world stage, is diminishing. And I can't really see a situation where the tail wags the dog. There's another thing. I do believe being mobility promotes open-mindedness and greater tolerance. And I do make a difference between going to a different country to work or to study there and going on to a gap year with your daddy or mummy's credit card in your pocket. That usually leads to greater prejudice. One last thing. I'm not Margaret Thatcher. I was never particularly fond of the lady. And I do not agree with what she said about there is no such a thing like society. There's only individuals and families. However, from a counselor point of view, if I now had a client who wanted to be mobile and he or she knew, and so would I, that him or her going on a mobility experience, maybe work, study, or God knows what, abroad, would be negative for the community, I most certainly would say, well, look, I'm awfully sorry. I think you ought to go. You cannot always put the interests of a group in front and before your own personal interests, because then you're going to end up being, yes, you continue to be a member of that community, of that group, but you're very likely to be a frustrated one.
Maybe
another association yes. That if we wanted to guide our counsel, our clients, that as everything is changing, so also as a consequences of socio-economic changes in all global economy, we can say that also they have emerged new concept of career, and one of these new concept is the so-called boundaryless career. And in this concept, what is important is our attitude to mobility, we can say, how we are able to cross borders. And there is a perception of two types of borders. One of them, if we are able to cross physical objective borders, so if we move, for example, to other region, town, village, or country. And another issue of boundaryless career is our psychological mobility, because sometimes we got barriers in our mind. So what is important is our attitude, and it's in context of changes, because I understand that our attitudes are formed in childhood and during whole our life, but I guess that who poses positive attitudes to various kinds of changes also is open-minded and got more positive attitude towards mobility, changes, and also open society.
Yeah, thank you. So the last 2 points, yeah.
We all saw the dramatic photos that Jean-Jacques showed us, and we know that the human history is long, but the human memory is pretty short. And contrasting the very recent developments from 3 years ago when we had this so-called refugee crisis, and then seeing the photos from the Second World War, and of course, we all know that there has been a Second World War, but we should really look more into that. Not that we get stuck with the history or the past, but simply get reminded of all the terrible things that happened back then, that we, our generation or our generations would not repeat again. So it's in our hands to make the future look brighter again, and remember that the past is haunting us, but we should really try to be positive and optimistic about the future. But we should not be dormant. We should really actively seek new opportunities, whether that's in our own country or abroad. It depends on us. But definitely, we usually get to know ourselves better if we travel to a new environment and see how things are there. Then we have to mirror and reflect all those things through us, and that can be a hurting experience occasionally and challenging and contesting our values and worldviews, but it also enriches our life tremendously.
And do you think mobility can have a role in this? That to change the history? Is that what you are saying?
No, I mean, we definitely cannot change the evil things that have happened, nor the good things, but even in our own life, when negative things happen, as always is the case, it's about the meaning we give to those negative developments or happenings. It's how we see the situation, what it taught us, what we learned from it. And we can only learn from the past and try to see how we bridge that experience to the future. So I can only suggest that, yes, I'm a great believer in mobility. Whether it's short-term or long-term, it definitely gives us all something. And that is then something we can share with others. And if you, as career guidance practitioners, would get the opportunity to go abroad, do so. Because then it's easier again for you to talk to your diverse clientele, interested in those mobility opportunities or not, but you can at least raise awareness that there is a world outside of one's own little town. Thank you.
So the last one, and then we go to a huge circle.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to the issue of mobility for education and the role of local education. I come from a background where I have worked for a regional university, the University of the Highlands and Islands in Scotland, and I think the establishment of education in a local community is really important. So I would disagree with the need to go elsewhere or the value of going elsewhere. I would perceive there's a value in staying in your community as well, and that local education has a role in the community. I also think there's a potential danger in equating geographical mobility with open-mindedness and immobility and a local focus as closed-minded, because I don't think those things are necessarily related. I think you can remain in your community and be open-minded, and I think you can access the world and different perspectives, not just through travel. I think travel is valuable, but I think you can access different perspectives through different mediums as well. So I just wanted to raise that as a counter position almost.
Thank you. So it's open now. Já bych vás chtěl požádat, kdybyste teď ve dvojicích na chviličku někde, koho máte nejblíž, teď si udělal takový malý reflektivní teda kroužek s někým blízko vás. Jestli jste sami, tak se posuňte někam, přesuňte na chvilku. Je to tak na 2 minutky, jo? Jenom prostě, abyste pozdíleli, co máte s někým vedle vás, a potom vás poprosím, když se vám vygeneruje nějaký zajímavá otázka, kterou byste chtěli položit z toho dialogu ve dvou, tak právě ji položíte. Jo? Takže se na ně těšíme tady na ty otázky. We are looking forward to questions from this small reflective discussion in pairs. And after that we will follow discussion together. Tak jestli vás můžu poprosit pomaličku to ukončit, tu debatu, to finalize your thoughts and ideas. A máme teda 20 minut na společnou debatu. A můžete něco sdělit i česky, in Czech, in English, a potom může vlastně reagovat zase tady panel na to, co se zeptáte nebo sdělíte všem. A nebo může reagovat někdo jiný tady zleva na někoho zprava. To není vůbec zakázaný, to je jako demokratický dialog. Tomáš.
Stefan Greiter, Slovakia. John Fitzgerald Kennedy wrote a book at the end of 50s. It is called the Nation of Immigrants. His assassination was 2 days ago, 55th anniversary. I think he was assassinated on the 22nd of November, 63. But what I want to ask is, and this is something what also mentioned yesterday, and also Jean-Jacques today, that also some other countries become nation of immigrants. And the question is if Europe as such is not becoming a place where during next decade we can expect quite substantial bigger portion of people born or coming from third countries. And the question is how we are prepared to face it, how we are prepared as guidance professionals to reflect it in our practices. Thank you.
So maybe you can react if you want.
Yes, I can react. Oh, it's very difficult. It's a huge question, very to the point also. I would say that can you be prepared in some ways? But I think you have to be, I think that was what I tried to say yesterday. The situation of migrants sort of makes us to become learnings. We learn also. We have to learn during the time. So that is the way. And when we learn, we become better. We have better. We get better ideas. We get to know this because it's not something. Nothing is ever stable. Also, and I think it's and what is connected to that. I think it's how you develop a education system also that can address and can meet people's needs, I think, in that. And that is what we discussed this morning also, that is also good for, not only for immigrants. When you make develop a education system that you can attend when you are older and to get education as an adult, then that's more sort of flexible education system. And that is really what we need to do, I think. Because otherwise it will be very, very problematic also. But it's not only immigrants that have benefits from that also. But I think we learn. We will learn, I think. We have to.
I mean, I said earlier on we've got 47% of foreigners living on a permanent basis in Luxembourg. I'm not going to pretend now that all these foreigners, in the same way as the 200,000 people who come into Luxembourg on a daily basis, come because we're nice people. They come because we pay nice salaries and because they are jobs. And at the same time, it's not one big family. There is the phenomenon of parallel societies. Above all, if you've got a large group of immigrants in Luxembourg, you would above all have the Portuguese. However, it will take time, and nowadays, I mean, I remember when the first Portuguese came to Luxembourg. Nowadays, you will have surgeons, you will have lawyers, you will have all kinds of people of all kinds of origin. I'm talking about Europe now, European origin, that mix and get on with each other. And the one thing that everybody coming to Luxembourg desperately, okay, with the exception of the French, tries to learn is Luxembourgish. Because if you want to be integrated, you learn Luxembourgish, you learn the language. And I think that's very important. And because most people in Luxembourg speak French and German, they can easily communicate in another language. But it takes time, and it takes efforts on behalf of everybody, and it is beneficial, as Oza said, also to the so-called natives. Very much beneficial. If tomorrow all the Frenchmen decided to stay at home, we would close shop. It's that simple. And I think at a European level, I don't understand our governments in Europe that pretend that we can actually get on and continue the way we've been doing in the past, we will need more people to come into Europe, many more people. And the other thing is, I mean, I'm not a genius like Donald J. Trump, so I'm not in favor of building a wall. But I remember in the 70s there was a film, kind of a prophecy, where people were fleeing Africa, and the whole of the Mediterranean was covered in small boats, and politicians in Europe sitting here and saying, what shall we do? We can't really nuke them, can we? And I think the only way we can have some kind of controlled migration into Europe is if we invest in the countries of origin. And there's one of my countrymen who's published a fantastic book on how the EU, with the help of the Commission, with the help of the national governments, with the help of the European Parliament, screws, I'm sorry for my French, the local farmers in various African countries by selling subsidized produce to these countries, so the local farmers no longer can compete. That we are causing immigration and migration and refugees, and we don't want to admit it. And our politicians are playing at Ponce Pilate, washing their hands in innocence.
So the last point, yes, and then...
Yes, Stefan, a good question indeed. Jean-Jacques already referred to the demographic changes that we see in our societies. For example, in Finland, we have a rapidly aging population, and the burden for those who are working to support those who have got retired is getting extreme in the next few years, and we definitely need more people to come. Okay, then it's a matter who wants to come to the north, but some do, and then it's in our interest to see them as resources, not as problems. Of course, we need to find ways to support their integration process. Lots and lots has been done already, but more needs to be done. And then also people fleeing from their countries, leaving everything behind, not getting their certificates or important documents with them. They have no proof of what they have studied, what they know, where they have been working. So it's not only about guidance. I really think that we should look at the validation procedures and processes as well. And guidance and validation needs to work closely together so that we can easily map out what skills and competencies those people have who come to our countries and how they can be useful for the country and that way useful for themselves. Nobody can tell exact figures, how many thousands, hundreds of thousands people will be coming in the next few years, but I'm sure there will be more coming because we need them. And then it's a tremendous challenge to our societies, for the policy and decision makers to solve those problems and sooner than later. I think that the refugee crisis in 2015 taught us many things. The European Union, the European countries, they were not really prepared for that. It just happened. Yeah, okay, probably we could not have been prepared. But still, we are monitoring the world around us, and we know about developments around us. So, in that sense, I'm not sure that it was really a surprise, because, I mean, the situation had been so explosive for a long time already before it then actually happened. So, it was our laziness and stupidness that we did not react soon enough. And then that caused chaos in our countries, and now there are member states really having difficulties in all this. Thank you.
Thank you. So it was clear, I think, for us and interesting for Czechs. Silva, but you need microphones.
Sooner or later I'll pass it to you. May I? Thanks a lot. Anyway, my name is Thomas. I've been listening to your speeches, and I must say, very interesting, very inspiring, a lot of it. Now, a lot of thoughts on my head at the moment. Back to migration and immigration. What's your opinion on economic migration, both within the European Union and, of course, from other countries? Now, the question is, don't you think that we are draining the countries of origin, partly by this economic migration, that we may be causing more damage both to the original countries and the individual itself, who is moved to a different environment, mostly because of economic reasons. And at the same time, I think to a certain extent, it may even badly influence the country of arrival after some time. Because of course, until a certain amount, until a certain number of migrants, the atmosphere will be probably positive, but then it may change in the future. If there are too many, the local community may not find it so pleasant anymore. So I just wanted, like to ask you about your opinion, or what do you think about it? Thanks a lot.
Right. I mean, whatever I'm going to say, please don't take it personal. I personally don't make a difference between somebody who runs away from his home country because of war or because he's got no means to feed his family. So I think the distinction between a political refugee and an economic refugee is an artificial one. And I strongly disagree with politicians who go on about that. I had the misfortune to spend a day in a hospital in London 3 years ago. I did not meet a single so-called British native. They were Italian, Bulgarian, all kinds of nationality. And there was nothing wrong with that. I want to be looked after, and I was treated. And that's all that mattered to me. And if you're an ordinary Brit, that's all that matters to you too. The other thing you mentioned is, oh, well, if there are too many. Well, we in Luxembourg think that in 5 years' time, the majority of the population will be non-Luxembourgish. We have got double nationality, but that's a choice you make. And if people don't want to take it up, that's fine. But on the other hand, it also means that the democracy we have, the parliamentary democracy, is not representative. There are no more workers in parliament, basically lawyers and civil servants, and the parliaments in most European countries are not representative of the population either. But I think that's down to the fact that our lives, our world has become very complex. The other thing is, what is too many? I don't think there is a figure where you can say that's too many. If I now take, for example, the Polish community in England, they're now returning home. I mean, there was the brain drain you mentioned earlier on, and they're now returning home. And people, yes, obviously, if you've got an important influx of, let's say, foreigners into your community, that poses a number of demands you may not be well equipped to deal with. But on the other hand, once they leave, that poses also a different set of problems. And I think what I really miss with our governments, wherever we are, and even in Luxembourg, that politicians don't take the trouble to explain to people why we need migration, why these people are there. I mean, my mother is 85. The world she was born in no longer exists. The world I was born in no longer exists. The world my daughter is 30 was born in no longer exists. And God knows what it's going to be like in 10 or 20 or 30 years. So there is permanent change. And I think we have got to accept that and not pretend that there is something new. And I really think politicians ought to take the trouble to say, look, you see, come on, this is reality. Just deal with it.
Yeah, just one comment. I'm not an expert on these issues, economic, how it affects economy. And it's a huge discussion as well, and it's not easy to count on, and how it affects economies in countries. But I would just want to say that I think that due to migration researchers, the migration has sort of design today or whatever. Oh, this language, when you can't find the words. But it's like it has changed, the face of migration is changed also, that is transnational, and it's not from one country to another country. Because, as you were talking about, migration has been going on and it will be part of our lives, many people's lives for a long time, and it's more like people live in transnational relations also. So it's not leaving and then entering and then so from what I know in Sweden, that we have had quite a lot of migrants for many years, that you develop also networks through this, of course, that is about that you continue to live in transnational relations, and you have networks that you build together with different countries also, that open up for business or whatever it can be, and also for developing and to bringing back. And I think that is also what, when you talk with migrants, with people with a migrant background, what is important to them, for them, many in the future, when they consider their future of careers, it's to help, to support both the country they are in and also the country they come from, also to contribute to society is very important. And they are not as individualistic, I would say. They are more into word-changing approach to their future, and I think that is really interesting. What that will. We don't know what that will mean, but I think that a lot of business relations are built anyway between countries through these networks also.
Just one final remark. Yeah, for sure, we all want to earn our living, and if the grass is greener in another country, then probably we will follow this economic incentive. We can do that voluntarily, but many are forced to choose so. And then the risk is that we end up seeing segregated labor markets and even education markets in our countries. And a recent development in Finland is that, as we have received more third country nationals to Finland, that many of them end up having jobs in the service sector, bus drivers, taxi drivers, cleaning ladies, etc. And they might have a university degree, but they do, let's say, lowly skilled labor. And we Finnish people, we don't want to do those jobs anymore. We want to have fancier jobs, more academic jobs, better paid jobs. And this is a bad development, of course, that we should then make sure in terms of guidance and counseling, that also guidance practitioners, that they don't automatically offer migrants a study place in nursing, for example, but that they really try to map out that, hey, this is your potential and you have strengths here and there, and so maybe you could choose something else and not go to certain profession, as is happening in Finland at the moment and probably in many other countries in Europe as well. And this is something that we should be aware of and also communicate to our politicians.
I just want a short comment. I think it has to do with age also, at what age you arrive in a country. You can see, and from Swedish research, you can see that you have, it depends on when you see when a person has arrived to Sweden and what you do to start with, and that you have quite a clear career process, development also. So after 7 or 8 years, quite a lot has happened from where you start and what has changed after a while. And if you're younger, it goes faster, of course, because you learn quicker when you are younger, lucky you also. So it changes a lot. And this is also where it comes to that the migration supports the career counseling profession, because you need a lot of, and you use a lot of career counseling also to have this development also.
Yeah, I think from my perspective that was a really good question, and I think the dynamics around migration are really complicated, and I think being aware of that complexity is useful. My focus is obviously on internal migration, not international migration, but from my perspective, we know that young people leave the rural communities to access jobs in urban labour markets and access an escalator effect. They go up more quickly in terms of their career, and they sometimes are doing that as a way of then coming back to their communities in a higher level job, which also means that for people who stay in their communities, if you're bringing in people in their 40s or 50s into the higher level jobs, the opportunity for progression within your own community is limited. So I think there are really interesting and challenging dynamics there, and I think it's very difficult to simply say that migration is good or bad for a community. And another example would be international migration from small islands where people go away, and the MIRAB model of economic development in island communities, which recognizes migration as a source of income for small islands. People go away and they send money back. So you've got a very complicated interrelation, I think, of migration and economic development.
Thank you.
International migration is very important for the countries also, that you support your, because that is many migrants, I need to get to work, so I send money home. So you contribute also to the country at home, to your families and to also. So.
Hello, I would like to ask a different phenomenon, mobility abroad from the country and its value for a coherent development of the country, because the perspective, the Central European perspective now is that the bubbles really are going very different. You know, the bubble of those who have experience being abroad and are somehow linked to the wider, you know, ideas and I would say European knowledge and so on, and the other bubble, which is somehow disconnected out of it, and also many times also not so much interested in. And so how to deal with it, with the value of mobility that it brings to the coherent development of the society, that the value of those with the international experience, that those people are not considered as a strange cosmopolitan people with the political agenda coming from Europe, which is happening a little bit now. We live a dehonestation of NGO sector and so on. That's the current situation in the Czech Republic, a little bit. So how, maybe you have already an experience with this, so how those bubbles can, how we can make a bridge between, because that's, I think, a big deal, that the people, that we have a gap between the knowledge and expertise. Thank you.
Any experts here?
I can only answer you from personal experience, and as far as a couple of years ago, I got a contract through KPMG. They were desperate to get Luxembourgers to train with them and then ideally go abroad because of the languages. They have been unsuccessful for various reasons, because life in Luxembourg is reasonably good. They've got their girlfriend or boyfriend or family or whatever there, and they want to stay there, and above all, they have got a good life. That's important. If now you get offered a post, let's say in Singapore for 3 or 5 years, yes. But the illusion is that when you come back, you will be welcomed with open arms. Because while you have been away, your workmates, your former colleagues will have done everything possible to promote their own careers. And you will not be the wonder kid that comes back. It's not like, I mean, I'm not particularly religious, so there's this thing of the lost son who returns home. That's not quite the case. And I think, yes, you've got two worlds that collide, but basically it is an issue you cannot solve, because if you have got somebody who doesn't want to go and become an expat, there's nothing you can do about it. In the worst case, you can say, well, look, you're not going to get any promotion here. Employers do threaten people, or we will bypass you next time round. But it is very difficult. It is two worlds that collide, and it's very often down to personality and family situation. Once you start having a family with kids being in a specific educational system, it is very tricky to uproot them. And I know there was many years ago some European project, I don't remember its name now, where you were offered all kinds of comparative views of the different education system in Europe. If I take the European schools in Luxembourg, we've got 3. That is a nightmare to manage. It is a nightmare to manage. And French people will go into the French section, Brits into the English, and so on. So there's not this mix happening we're all dreaming about.
From my perspective, I think it's interesting to think about what the opportunities for mobility are. And I think that this comes down to the reinforcing inequality if we don't recognize that actually mobility requires resource. And I think we need to think about what are the opportunities for everybody to benefit from mobility and how can we support people. So, for example, there are opportunities that are available if you're at university and engaged in higher education, but what are the opportunities for people who are in lower levels of education, and what are the opportunities for people who are in low-paid, low-skilled work to move and to engage more widely. So I think there is a question about inequality in resource, and I think we have to recognise that not everybody has equal ability to benefit, and we need to think about how we address that. And I'm just trying to catch the other thought that I had. The other thought was, I think we need to be careful about stigmatizing and thinking in terms of us and them, thinking in terms of, well, we have moved and we know the benefits of collaboration and other people don't. And I think we need to be careful about us and them and think more in terms of how we can work together and build bridges.
Coming from Brexit, I just want to thank you, Sylvie, for your question, because I think you really addressed it, a very important question also, regarding cooperation and the European Union and the society at all, also. On another level, it's a very dramatic question, actually, also, and important. And I was thinking, do you have an answer? No. How to manage these issues, because they are really hard, I think, also nowadays, and it's and threatening in many ways, I think, also, and that is related to what you are saying, also, to not think in dichotomies or we and them, and try to avoid that. But it's about identities also, and it's how you feel valued and what you belong. The concept of belonging, I think, also is relevant for understanding it. Maybe it helps, I don't know.
Thank you. So we have short time now, so one comment only, and then we can go to next 2, and then we have to stop. Thank you.
So I also think that this question is incredibly crucial, because here in our countries we are a little bit in a vicious circle. So that I see it in Austria, the budget are tremendously cut for counseling for migrants. So one part of the political establishment is not interested in integration. And this not being interested in integration brings this anger from a part of the society, which makes this right-wing politics stronger. So that's really something which is difficult to handle. And I also don't have an answer towards this.
And then also how we are influenced by fake news. I'm reading a book by 4 Finnish authors just published this autumn about post-truth period. And it's amazing what's happening in the media. And the journalists these days, they are so much under pressure that they don't always have the time to look into the sources, to have the sources validated. They repeat news from other countries, just have them translated, etc. And sexy headlines, very provocative headlines. And then we believe that these are real news, serious news, but actually they might be totally fake news. And when we talk about migration or immigration, when we talk about any phenomenon in our societies, we have to be extremely critical when we read those news or listen to them. We should not only rely on one source, we should really check several sources to make sure that we have an overview of what's being discussed, how things are being discussed. And this we see from Austria, from many other countries as well, that those in power, they use their position and they communicate certain messages, and the media people then often repeat these, some more critically than others, but often they are repeated in ways that really create more problems than solutions to us. So this is also something you as guidance professionals should keep in mind when informing your own clients, whoever they are.
I see Jean-Jacques would like to say.
One last word, because I don't want you to end up starving. The thing, I mean, what Mika said is true. There's one book I can recommend, The Perils of Perception. And that's an amazing book where you just simply have, how many foreigners do you think live in your country? And people will say, well, that's 25%, and it's 5%, and so on. The Perils of Perception, a book I can warmly recommend.
Osko?
I would like to ask you about another context of mobility. I could see or read about the mobility as a barrier to your career development. For example, we have a huge problem with the lack of women in science because they are not able to be mobile and are not able to go abroad because they start with families, and then they leave the academic sphere, the research sphere, and we lose very talented women who can go on with their career because they are not able to be mobile. Do you face the same problem in your countries, in academic sphere or in the other sphere, that some especially women or the other people who have some personal barrier, personal problems, or the other reason why not to move, that it's really sailing for their career?
So, 1-2 short comments if you have.
I'm not an expert in this subject. I think there are some careers more than others that require mobility. And the thing that comes to my mind immediately is that I'm a PhD student still, and I am in a group of people who are PhD students and parents, and this is a common topic of discussion because academic careers require mobility, and most of the people in this group have children, their parents, and see their mobility as restricted, and that causes a big concern. I have no solution for this, but I think...
I was just curious if you have another rules, because it was realized here in Czech that if we require the same rules for women and for the men, it doesn't matter that they have the same start point for their careers, but that is a sailing for the women because they really are not able to fulfill that, and they just can leave the scientific career because they are not able to fulfill that.
I think for me, where I am is awareness. I think it's really important to talk about this, and I think it's important to raise awareness. I don't know what the solution is, but I think the first step is to raise awareness and then to think about how we can support everybody in their careers and not make an assumption that people have to be mobile to succeed.
And it's about, you were talking about rules as well, or for parental leave or something like that, or for, is that what sort of makes the frame for
this was not
the
about parental leave.
It
was not about the parental leave, but when you have a family, your kids go to school, it's not like that you take them for the whole year, tell your husband, oh my darling, we can go for 1 year abroad and then go back. Usually men do that and their wives go with them, but not in opposite. So not here in Czech, usually.
I think it could be maybe, I don't know what it looks like in Sweden actually, but I think and hope that it is changing quite a lot also, since we have more and more, the gender roles are changing quite a lot also, how much, how you share what you, the responsibility for the family and how you see who's, so I think it's changed, but don't know.
Sorry, I would just add that I think there is a complicated interrelation of gender and mobility, and I think often it's women whose mobility is restricted, but also sometimes for men. So if a man happens to be with a partner who is higher earning, then their mobility may also be constrained. But it just happens to be that in most cases it's women's careers, depending on your context and your profession. But most often it's women's careers that are impacted.
I mean, the thing on salary, Rosie just said, is definitely true also in Luxembourg. But I would say there's another issue. It's the issue of public employment and private employment. In public employment, the situation is actually reasonably good. But in private employment, and that probably is valid, okay, women still will take a step back as a rule, but on the whole, in public employment, the government is going to try to do whatever is possible to facilitate it. But it's not an easy issue. It's not easy at all, and I don't think you can establish or set up rules how to go about it. And I know of one country, and I think it's very strongly biased against women, and that is France. On the one hand, you give birth, and basically 3 weeks later you can put your kid into some kind of nursery, which I don't think is great, but then the woman can return straight away to work. However, when it comes to the protection of jobs, the French government or state, it's a state because it's all the governments, they actually favor men keeping their jobs rather than women, and that is quite disastrous. And that's also true in academia.
Veronika, if you...
Já bych se chtěla vrátit jenom mým komentářem k té debatě o imigraci a o tom, jak na to reaguje česká společnost. Ta debata, která je vedena jako v české společnosti, nebo pokud to vůbec můžeme nazvat debatou, podle mého názoru vždycky naráží na strach, s kterým se tu jako hodně operuje. A když si uvědomíte, že jsme ve společnosti, která 40 let žila ve strachu a několik generací v tom strachu vyrostlo, že je hrozně jednoduchý ten strach v lidech znovu vyvolávat a to ovlivňuje celou tu debatu. Takže myslím, že ten strach je jako prvopočátek toho, jak tu debatu vést a jak s lidmi o tom mluvit a to si myslím, že tady vůbec neprobíhá.
Only a comment to your remark. You know, from psychological point of view, the most efficient way how to influence people is to use emotions. And we can use positive emotions or negative emotions. So it depends on our figurehead, you know, from government level or other political parties, because if we are anxious or got fear from something, so we are searching for a big father, if I use, you know, Freud's prototype, how to influence groups and crowds. So if we understand psychological mechanism, we can understand also a little bit situation, what's happening in different countries. So if we want to be influenced, sometimes we are, all people are influencing each other. You know, there are interconnection. And sometimes we are influenced on unconscious level that we are not aware of it. So also it's very good in context of education to develop critical way of thinking, you know, not to, you know, because also in political life we can perceive an invasion of marketing skills and how to influence people on a high level of sophistication. So we weren't used to such, you know, tools. So also it's good to educate from childhood, you know, open-minded and, you know, the ability to compare, to think.
If I could ask you for all of you to last sentences, and then we will finish, okay? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Eva. I was also thinking in terms of the fear factor being at play all the time. And I revert back to what I said earlier about the fake news and how we are manipulated by the media. So definitely, if you just look at the headlines, then clearly you see that we are, how would I say, bombarded by emotional messages that easily provoke fear, stress, anxiety, whatever. But we should really see behind that there is, all the political powers are behind that and trying to influence our minds. Okay, thank you.
I don't have any words, I think, what to say about this, but just some fine. But I think also that maybe you should take this, we have to sort of understand the fear and the worries. And I think in Sweden, for example, it's, you can see in different, in small societies, the society is changing a lot. And that causes fear, because you are not familiar, and you have to respect that also. We have to understand that that is what happens. We cannot close our eyes for it, and maybe to respect that, but also to be very, to have strong inclusion work also. Strong inclusion work, and to be interested in inclusion work also. But it is difficult also. And it, but sort of understand the fear and respect the fear also. Hug the fear. That is my final word, yes. Hug the fear. Give the fear
a hug. Thank you. I also don't have an awful lot to say on this topic because I think it's been covered, but I would go back to what I said before about us and them, and I think where possible we should seek to engage and listen and communicate as well. So I think we all exist within communities. We all know lots of people. We exist within our national community, international community, and local communities. And I think we have a responsibility to engage in debate respectfully, to challenge opinions which are maybe unfounded, but to do that respectfully. I think it's about listening, and I think it's about communicating.
I would like to use an analogy. I think we're all a bit like on the Titanic. The Titanic was quite mobile too for some time. And on the Titanic you had also different classes, and obviously they didn't necessarily intermingle, except in the film. On the Titanic, there were also quite a few first-class passengers, and I think most of us are first-class passengers, whether we like to admit it or not. We are very privileged. But quite a few first-class passengers also drowned. And what worries me most is that the captains in our different compartments, i.e. our governments, are not looking out for the icebergs. They don't really believe in the peril of icebergs, and I'm very worried.
Thank you very much. So I don't fear. I think it was for me it was very optimistic now, because Jean-Jacques thank you for your last nice words. Thank you very much. Go to informal communities around lunch, around our lunch, and then we will have some late. Budeme trošku opožděni.